This video is going to be going over the editing process of two STLs that I created in ITK Snap using Meshmixer. So first we're going to import the models. The first one I'm going to import is my Bloodpool model. So here you can see it loading, and it is a very large file. So one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to reduce the size of it just to make it a lot easier for editing. So once the model is loaded, it's going to pop up on your screen like this. You can use the right click to rotate around the model and move around, and pressing down the center wheel will be able to pan. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to hit select. By pressing on the model and then using the shortcut E, we can select the entire model. Next, we're going to go to edit and then reduce. This is where we're going to be able to reduce the triangle count. There's a couple different ways to do this. What I like to do is I like to use the percentage tool. I find it a little bit easier to understand. And I want to keep on shape preserving. It won't deform the model then. And at least for my models, reducing it by 50% seems to leave me with still the same amount of detail, more or less, and allows me to run my computer a little bit easier. So clicking I will correct the inverse of your models. If there's any floaters, then I can delete them. Next step, we're going to align it. So we're going to send our model to the origin. So the one thing that you want to make sure when you're doing it is that it doesn't say translate and rotate, because if we rotate it, it's going to be a lot harder to line up our two STLs later on. So what this does is it brings it to the origin of our screen, because sometimes they load in weird areas. The next thing we're going to be doing here is offsetting the model. So again, we're going to select the whole entire model and go to edit and offset. Now these might take a while to load. I've sped it up a bit, but it can take up to like 5 or 6 minutes to load, depending on the complexity of your model. So next here, we have to choose how much to offset it. The more you offset it, the thicker the walls of your model will be, but also the more almost cartoony it will look, and you start to lose some of that detail. And also, if things are touching each other, that can lead to holes. So you want to make sure you don't offset it too much, so places like on the aorta might touch the different structures, and that'll leave a hole in your downward aorta. Sorry about that. Again, so that there was at 0.5. Now I'm going to show you what it's like if we offset it by 1 millimeter. Alright, so now that we've got our offset selected, our next step is going to be to hollow out the model. The one thing to remember is that you want to hollow out the model the same distance that you offset. That way the blood pool will actually become the hollowed cavity. So then you get the exact anatomy that you segmented from your scans. So again, I remember that I had offset it by 1 millimeter, so that's what I'm going to do for the hollow. So now we have a hollowed out model of our blood pool. So I'm going to use the plane cut tool here under the edit selection to then go through and open up our descending aorta. So you have different options here. You can either discard the other half that you cut apart, or you can keep them both, and it creates multiple shells. Also, that blue arrow, whichever way it points, the large blue arrow, that's what's going to be deleted. So now you can see it really is hollow inside. So our entire model is hollow. So we're going to go through and cut open some different areas. So that might be the branches coming off of the aorta. Those ones there will be a little bit tricky, as we only want to cut one specific place without chopping everything, because a plane cut will cut the entire model. So we're going to have to go in and select it first. Under the select tool, you can either paint over or you can click. For me, it works a little bit better when I try to click around. So then I can go to edit and plane cut. And again, switching that blue arrow so that it makes sure I'm discarding the right spot, and I've got another opening. Now we're going to do that with the other one as well. So again, clicking to select, edit, plane cut, and clicking that big blue arrow to make sure that I'm deleting the right side of the model. Perfect. So now what I have is a hollowed out blood pool model, and we're going to open it up so we can see inside of that anatomy. Again, we're going to go to Edit, Plane Cut, and you can rotate the model, or rotate the plane cut. You can also draw on, or if you go up to the top here, you can translate by 5 degrees, which I find a lot easier. It has that snapping to the degree markers. So now you can choose where the best cut will be to showcase the anatomy that you're trying to illustrate. Here we can see there's one VSD in the front there. This is a heart of a child that has tetralogy of Fallot. So now we're going to bring in the myocardium that I segmented as well. We want to make sure to append, not replace the model, which will allow us to have both the models in one scene. So we're going to go through the same process. So first here what will happen is the object browser is going to pop up. So we're going to hide the blood pool model for now. You can always bring up this object viewer under view and then open object browser. So we're going to select everything. So again, pressing on and then using the E shortcut. So on this model here, there's a few floaters that we can see. We're going to hit I and delete those. Those are just places where I'd segmented that weren't connected. So let's again select everything. And now we're going to go and reduce the model. So edit and reduce after you have everything selected. Again, this loading can take a while. I've sped it up. So here we can see we're not really losing any quality, but we are making the file sizes much smaller, which allows our computer to run better. Perfect. So now we can go through and edit, and we're going to do a smoothing operation on this one, as there are some places where the segmentation was a little bit rough. You can see kind of like a stepping. So here you can go in and decide how smooth you want it. Again, the more smoothing you do, the more detail you're going to lose. So going through and pulling that slider and deciding how much smoothing is appropriate for your model. Again, keeping on shape preserving I think is a really good idea, as then you don't lose that outer edge of the object. So once you're finished, hitting OK will bring us back to our selection menu. And there's a couple places on the model still where I'd like to smooth it a little bit further. So I think I'm going to do some manual smoothing. But first we're going to align it. So again, we're going to the same tool and making sure we have it just transformed, not rotating. Otherwise it's going to be very difficult to align the blood pool and the model. So now, again, going to view and turning on our object browser, we can open up the blood pool model and we can start to align them. So we're going to go to edit and transform. And I like to turn off the snap spacing for this just so I can be a little bit more precise. And what I try to do is I try to align the aorta into the top of the myocardium. That's kind of a good landmark. And then I try to find some other landmark, whether that's some form of vein or the pulmonary arteries, to try to get everything lined up properly, which can take a little bit of time. So this is something you want to do now and take your time. Otherwise, once you cut the model, it's really not going to work out. So here I'm just slowly moving it until the aorta starts to line up. And now on this model here, I have that one artery that's coming around. So I can try to line up those two. Again, to zoom in on the model, you scroll on the wheel of your mouse. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit accept. Perfect. So I've got these two models that are not combined, but then they're in the right position. So I'm going to go in again and turn on that object browser, and I'm going to hide the blood pool again. I'm going to select okay, what am I doing? I'm going to select that, and now we're going to do some manual editing on the myocardium. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the flatten tool. And for me, you can either do this with the mouse. I also have a Wacom tablet computer, which makes my life a whole lot easier. But what I want to do here is I want to blend in some of that flattened part that happened from the segmentation. So I want to try to make this a nice seamless transition from the blood pool to the myocardium. So I like to use a combination of the flatten tool as well as the different shrink brushes. I find that to kind of be my best option so far. You can also go through and just fully shrink out any areas that you don't think you want to print. And you can change the size and strength of those brushes to try to get some smaller details, or if you are subtracting from areas that you don't want to, or smoothing areas you don't want to. So just going through again and choosing what brush is going to work best for that situation. And this was probably something I didn't really need to do, but I saw that some of the blood pool was on the descending aorta, or some of the myocardium was on that descending aorta. And I think next we're going to use that robust shrink smooth tool. So that just smooths a larger area. And at the bottom here was where I had to manually segment out the myocardium from the diaphragm. And that can be a little bit difficult and can lead to some of this stepping that you're seeing. That's because I had to draw on individual slices instead of using a semi-automatic tool. So this can be one of the areas that can look a little bit rough. So it's usually where I spend a little bit more time smoothing. Instead of doing a manual segmentation, what I did here is for smoothing out this large area, I went in and selected the entire area that I wanted to smooth out. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another auto smoothing section like I did to the entire myocardium. But at this point, if I lose a little bit of detail in the bottom, that's okay with me. So once I have all of that selected, all the areas that I want to get rid of this stepping, I'm going to go to deform and smooth. And here I'm going to play with the different controls, decide how much I want to smooth it. You can see really how drastic that can be. And then just playing with the different settings till I get something that I think looks good. For our models, we're creating teaching models. So what we're really worried about is the internal anatomy. So that's going to be that blood pool. That's why I'm only editing the myocardium and smoothing it out. Because for us, it's really, the myocardium is there so that it looks like a heart for our models. And for some of them where we are just printing an arch anomaly, we are just printing a hollowed out blood pool, which is a lot quicker because you don't have to segment out that myocardium and you don't have to go through this editing procedure. You can just have that offset and hollowed area in the blood pool as the model. So again, I'm going through now and selecting some areas that I don't want to have, some missegmentations. So that's again going just in the segment tool, painting over what I want to delete or clicking, and then hitting delete. And whatever is in orange is what I've selected. Now, what I'm going to do here is accidentally make a giant hole, which is something that I don't want because there is automatic tools to fill that in. But as you'll see here, I made it a little bit too large. So again, just going through. So next we're going to go to Analysis and Inspector, and what that does is it shows any problems. So I was hoping it would fill in this giant hole, and as you'll see in a second, it didn't. So that would be a big problem for me because I would have some problems with printing. I'd have a big hole in the back of my model. So what we're going to do is actually just undo all of that work that I did. And for this model, I think it's going to be all right if there is a little bit of material on that descending aorta. what I'll do instead is I'll just go in with the brush, and anything like the ones that are right on there, I'll just use the flatten tool, and I'll just try to shrink them down as much as I can. This was one of the first models that we printed, and it actually printed really successfully. There'll be some pictures at the very end. So again, just going through and using that flatten and smooth brush to try to just make sure that there's nothing sticking to the descending aorta. And now to fill in some holes, I found that the draw tool is pretty effective. So it's the same as flattening, but just the opposite. So I can go in and fill in some of the larger holes that are in my segmentation in the myocardium. If I do miss a few small ones, I didn't really find once I had the print that it was very noticeable. But if there's large stuff, I like to try to just fill them in a little bit, take a couple minutes. But what you want to be careful of is that you're not drawing in bumps, kind of like I did there, because that might be something that either you want to undo or you want to go in with the flattened brush after or the smooth brush and try to smooth those out. Again, here we have some places on the scan where I think it got some bones, some ribs. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but you can either try to flatten that out, which might take a while because it is a fairly large area, or you can go through again with select, and this time it's going to work a little bit better with those auto repair tools in Inspector. So creating that hole again, I want to try to get rid of some of that area. So we're going to go into Inspector again, and whatever we have that has those little lines and the little balls at the end, that'll be a problem area. So it filled in our model, which actually did a really good job. And now some of the edges are a little bit sharp, so I'm going to go in again with the sculpt brush and just smooth those out a little bit. And here's some more of that stepping that I kind of talked about in some of the areas where I had to do some more manual segmentation on the models. I'm really experimenting still with how much work to do in ITK Snap versus Meshmixer. So I'm working on that workflow still. But once we have kind of it as edited as I want, let's see. Still going through and getting rid of some of that stepping and just making sure that it's going to be all right. Next, we're going to select both of our pieces. So hitting shift and left click, we can see our two models together. And there's a few different options. You can combine them, Boolean union, Boolean subtraction. So using those to create holes in different things. So I'm going to combine the model first to give that a try. Because what we want to do is we want to open up some areas where we can see inside. So I'm going to go edit plane cut, and we're going to see what that looks like once the two models are together. So again, hitting accept, and I'm going to get rid of the other side of the model. So I'm going to try to repair this because as you can see inside of the myocardium. It didn't fill in those spaces. So turning on Inspector, we can see there's a lot of problems. So I'm just going to auto repair all of them. And let's see what this does. So it auto repaired almost all of them. There's two problem areas where it didn't work, and it still has that open area, and it just some jagged cuts. So it doesn't look like it did a very good job. So what I'm going to try next is undoing that combine and trying to just cut the two pieces separately. So Control Z is to undo. So instead of combining them, I'm going to just cut one at a time. So we will try here cutting the myocardium first. So we'll just cut it at an arbitrary place just to give this a test. And now we're going to try to do a plane cut at the same area. Later on in the video, I figured out that if I did the cut or the click for plane cut, I could then cut right along the exact same area. And when printing the model head, it would look like one piece, which is really nice. So here we can see that it looks a lot better than when I did the combine. We have the full myocardium, and we can also see that I did a pretty good job aligning it actually, which is nice. When I was doing the segmentation of the myocardium, I already had the blood pool done, and so it should have the exact cutout for the blood pool to fit into. So now we're going to undo, and we're going to try to do a cut on the side so that we can see that misplaced aorta as well as the two VSDs that are in this model. So I'm hiding the blood pool so that I can see a little bit better. So moving through, I want to do the cut on the right side of the heart, just on the side of the septum, so I can see those two VSDs as well as that misplaced aorta. So now we can turn on the visibility again for that blood pool, just hitting that little eye, and working on that plane cut. Originally I thought, I could rotate it to fit, but we'll see here in a second that using the clicks for the plane cut, so just doing 2 clicks with the left click, I can then align it right with where I want the cut to be. Perfect. Now, I had the blue arrow facing the wrong way, so I actually ended up deleting the wrong side. So hitting Control Z to go back. And all I have to do is left click on that blue arrow, and it will swap to the other side. So here I can see inside the aorta, I can see one of the VSDs. I actually ended up cutting it a little bit farther into the ventricle so that I could see both of the VSDs, because here I cut a little bit too far. You can also see some areas on the aorta where our segmentation wasn't quite perfect and ended up creating some holes. So that can either be from the segmentation or that can be from our offset being too great. And so here's some of the pictures of the printed model, which we printed on the Form 2, having to remove the supports afterwards. And thank you guys for listening.